Bom dia, pessoal. É uma alegria.
Good morning. It's a great pleasure to have you all here. Well, we had to change our space because our previous space was very small, which is a very nice um, evidence that we are improving. This is the seventh week of infrastructure, which is the uh, 11th X Forum. Before we had this function, we had the the PTT forums that has a more uh, name in English. We also call this IX and Internet Exchange. But before that, we had other things. This this meeting gathers a GTR and GTS. GTR is the network group that gathered the experts in Brazilian internet management. And since we have two per year, this is more than 20 years. So we have already a critical mass in infrastructure involving the major players of security and engineering, plus specific operational activities as exchange point. But usually it used to be a more academia participation, but today we have a branch, Abranet operators participating for some time already in exchange point and institutions with interest in the area. Apini, a branch will be participating. So this means that we had gathered several interests around internet, and that's why we have the peer-and-peer meetings for people to network. This is one of the most important aspects of this meeting because people talk directly and they clarify their questions, they learn from the others, and this is one of the most positive things we have. So for this meeting of the 11th uh, IX meeting and infrastructure meeting, we have a program that will be launched this morning. The program called More Security Internet, More Secure Internet. We have Milton and Fred, and in this security area, Christina and Klaus, who are working together to generate good news in this area. In the other side, which is not Nikki, we have Hais, Abranet, Abin. So this is an initiative that will bring, I suppose, more security in a moment that the internet is being threatening. And so this is an important point of the meeting, not only today, but it should be followed with caution. We have some updates, what is happening with IPv6, autonomous system, and PCVN. What is PCDN can involve suppliers, providers of transport. They can be operators or RNP, which is also important in participating in infrastructure. It's a pioneer in the internet in Brazil. And the idea of this open CDN is to bring attraction to exchange points that are not naturally so attractive as the large one. this is tricky. You go where you have more traffic, even if it is more expensive. And if you stayed in your region, and you would save money, and the network would be better distributed in terms of weight, more balanced, without going to more heavy traffic areas. Well, finally, we'll have a Parajo presentation because this is one of the topics that we should consider. There was a consultation on CGI alterations, starting with MEPC and then for the CG. Uh, the week before last week, we have a discussion in Rio de Janeiro, and what I consider important is to keep a welcome model. That is the model where organization, uh, a private non-profit company like NIC, it generates its resources.
É absolutamente obrigatório para os brasileiros. Você pode usar qualquer domínio, inclusive o BR, mas o BR, graças a Deus, tem funcionado bem, tem funcionado como locomotiva no processo. Então, geram-se recursos com o BR e esses recursos sustentam essa semana de infraestrutura que nós temos aqui, sustentam as atividades do CG, segurança, pontos de troca de tráfego, manuais, estatísticas, né? E esse modelo, então, é um modelo que na minha opinião, evidentemente, é virtuoso, foi criado em 95 inicialmente, e certamente existem discussões a respeito. Nada é perfeito, tudo pode ser tornado ainda melhor, mas é muito importante que seja preservada a ideia original, o conceito original de uma internet multissetorial, com todos os setores trabalhando em benefício das coisas serem mantidas abertas e livres e preservadas como ela era desde o começo. A internet está numa fase complicada, devido a N rupturas que ela causa. As técnicas são mais óbvias para nós, mas tem certamente rupturas pesadas na área social, essa história de notícias falsas, essa história de movimentos que têm participação de humanos e não humanos. Em suma, é um mundo complexo, né? Eu não tenho ideia exatamente para onde isso vai, mas é um mundo em que embarcamos, e já que embarcamos, temos que zelar para que esse barco siga no caminho que a gente sempre imaginou, o adequado para a internet, que digamos é o nosso objetivo final. A gente gosta dessa rede e vai tentar mantê-la em ordem dentro das nossas possibilidades. Então, pessoal, o que eu queria mais uma vez agradecer a essa quantidade de pessoas que veio aqui nesse auditório. Estou vendo ele bem cheio. Eu acho que vai ser uma semana muito interessante. Eu vou acompanhar o que der, e eu estou sempre ao redor dessa semana, que acho que é o ponto alto da interlocução de todos os atores na área, né? Desde o pessoal acadêmico, RNP, NIC, o pessoal das operadoras, o pessoal de provedores, o pessoal de segurança, o pessoal da Internet Society. Então, realmente um fórum técnico no Brasil que tem ficado cada vez mais importante e estável. Então, mais uma vez, boa semana para todos e tenhamos uma boa reunião aqui nesses dias aí. Obrigado.
Bom dia a todos.
Good morning. So, continuing with our event, I'd like to give you two suggestions. In this room beside us, where we have the sponsors desks, we have a desk called Fale com Nick, or Chat to Nick. We'll have Nick's personnel staff during the event to deal with several subjects and the different sectors. of Nick. So if you're interested, please go there. Another point, we will have a presentation in English where we will ask you to participate in answering a survey. So if you're more comfortable, so please ask for the translation equipment, the headsets, so you can participate with more effective in the survey. It is really important to have your participation and providing information that will help us to elaborate a plan that we are working on. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Facebook, Netflix, IPS Finizara, Wexi, IPX, Electronet Orient, Semig, Juniper Binaro, Tebek Stream, Format, Rucos, and especially Google, Abranet, and NTT, who are our platinum sponsors. So I'd like now to invite Ricardo Patara from Nick BR, and he will talk about numbering and resources allocation. Good morning. First, I'd like to thank for the invitation. The idea is to provide you some update on internet numbering, especially IP addresses, and there is a huge interest in knowing how is it going, the story of IPv4 and its use. I believe that most of you know in what context that Nick BR is inserted in IPv6 and 4 addresses. Nick BR has this role of the national resources for internet numbering. It's considered by LACNIC. It is one of the organs or that recognize the built of LACNIC and to be a national register. So if you need internet numbering, it is requested to NIC BR. In LACNIC is NIC Mexico, which is a register also acting as a national register. So we have these two institutions in the region. The other, they request directly to LACNIC with headquarters in Montevideo. The rules that NIC BR applies are the same as LACNIC's. In our case, they are authorized and ratified by the management committee, but the rules are the same. And it's important to highlight this because the rules and policies are defined by the community. We can participate in the forums, policy forums organized by LACNIC. There we receive suggestions and if approved, they are applied by LACNIC, UNIC BR, and LACNIC Mexico. We are living a special moment concerning IPv4. We are having a depletion or exhaustion. We have to organize the last allocations of IPv4. It was created a policy and phases. there was a phase where the maximum allocations were limited, and then this was limited to 1/22. You could have initial and additional allocation. I will talk about this later, but for this phase, we have a stock of 4 million of addresses. And then we will have the phase that we are currently, phase 3. This indicates that the maximum allocation is /22, but only for initial allocations. Those who had direct allocations for National Register or LACNIC cannot receive additional allocations. For these institutions, IPv4 is over. For those who do not have initial allocation, they still have some room reserved to allow them to put in their structure the minimum of IPv4 necessary, but thinking about IPv6. IPv4 is still important, but the idea of the policy is let's save some space that we think is enough to start, to put the transition mechanisms and implement IPv6. In this rule, allocations only occur, the IPv4 allocation, if the organization receives IPv6 together. It was enforced in February 15 with 4 million addresses, but this can increase because all recovered or returned state space comes back to this inventory. From February until now, we have almost 1 million addresses being allocated, and considering what has passed, the idea is that we have this inventory until the end of 2019. So we can select this until 2019. And the idea was to ensure a minimum space for the new entrants and to have its own allocation. I mentioned this. This anterior phase was phase 2. It started in June 2014 until February 2017. 4 million were allocated in this phase, serving slightly more than 4 million providers. This depletion policy plays an important role. Otherwise, large organizations who had justifications to receive great amounts of IP address would have taken all of this, and we had this concern of the community, and it has been many companies are benefiting for this. So many companies were benefited with IPv4 to build their infrastructure. Well, what I had to talk about this IPv4 running out was this. In May 2017, LACNIC May, that was in Brazil, in Foz do Iguaçu, was approved a new rule, a new policy, and after approved by the community, we have LACNIC meetings to put it into effect, allowing the allocation of smaller prefixes. The maximum used to be 22. So you need to justify this 22. Now, the rule says that it can go /24, /23, or 22. And the rules and justifications are in accordance with the maximum amount requested. We have 11 allocations of smaller prefix, 11/24 and 13/23, and this happened since August 2007 are Brazilian providers because this rule applies to providers. So they received smaller allocations than /22. According to the authors of this rule, who are Brazilian, it was necessary to have a rule to facilitate a smaller allocation and a less strict justification. And we have some companies who benefit from this rule. Now talking about IPv6.
It's very important to highlight IPv6, although multi-providers are still concerned about IPv4, but we do have to focus on IPv6 if we want internet to keep growing and to reach Internet of Things. But we are doing very fine, and 91% of all autonomous systems in Brazil, they do have IPv6 allocations. Therefore, the first step has been taken. And that is highlighted in terms of figures. The percentage of IPv6 allocations for autonomous systems everywhere, we are up front. Average would be 55%. We have the so-called NRO. This is an entity which has statistic presentations about regional use, and I got that information from their database. So that's the average, 55 to 60%. Our region, though, reaches 90%, and more specifically, Brazil amounts 91%. That's a very significant number, but not enough yet. Allocation is not everything. We need usage of that. Our internal statistics is very similar to the external one, where we reach around 25% access throughout IPv6 services. That number went up from 13% to 27%. Very significant. Here you see a chart from 2014 up to now, and you can see a growth. That's a very optimistic chart, but we still have room for further improvement. Rules and policies update. According to the LACNIC resolution, which took place last May in Foz do Iguaçu, a number of approvals took place, not just from a political standpoint, but also organizational changes. In addition to the approval of a new category, which allows a lower allocation and lower cost for initial allocations, some other changes that will benefit small and middle-sized providers. We had recalculated the maximum amount of IPv4 addresses that providers would have to be classified as being small. Providers that so far they were classified as average, as middle size, now they are classified as small. That's good news, and they change categories. That was they recalculated the maximum level. Providers that were in the middle category, now they had migrated to a small classification. In addition, some other categories were created. what was the amount paid by providers, and large providers, they would reach a certain level of category and they could have a great number of IP addresses and still remain in the same level. So that was recalculated. The new categories will become available from next January on. You'll be able to get that information in our website. Although we cannot see really well numbers, but at least we see here bar numbers, bar volumes. We have an increase in the past 3 to 4 years. When we had the drainage of that rule, there was more attention was given to that, and many people they were after these allocations. We have a high volume, around 200 requests monthly, an average of 10 requests every single day. Very high demand, which somehow would justify the feeling that the process is bureaucratic, it takes time, and still we can provide some assistance and information to those people that seek for information and answers. A quick reminder here, and please accept that as a warning. We are all part of a community, right? We share same interests and we work together. But unfortunately, we get lots of false, fake information. That's so upsetting. People that are trying to hinder others. In the past, we would get usage reports. How about your internet use nowadays? Send us a chart, a table from your systems, statistics of number of connected users. And we noticed that they were all fake information. And we thought, oh my God, people are trying to go over it. And now we have invoices, faked invoices with wrong amounts. And just by taking a look at them, you can tell that that's not real, that is a fake document. So we have to be double careful, request additional information, even from those that are doing things fine, but still we have to be liable for that. We have to allocate that with criteria, responsibility. If we do anything wrong, everyone else will be hindered. Sometimes we lose additional information, not because we do not trust that provider, we believe that provider will cheat or not. No, it's just that sometimes information is not enough, especially due to a minority that is trying to cheat the system by sending false information, and that's so sad. Here we have a number of requests and here allocations. SNN's number,
Alocados e IPv4.
number of autonomous allocated systems, IPv4, IPv6, significant growth. And that's it for now in terms of statistics and IPv4 and IPv6 allocations. I don't know if we have any time left for your questions, but anyhow, thanks for your time and attention.
Alguém tem alguma pergunta para o
Are there any questions to our speaker, Patara?
Bom, dando continuidade, gostaria de chamar o Kleber Carriel.
Next, Kleber Carrielli from Arbot Networks, who will address FlowSpec.
Bom, pessoal, antes de tudo, eu queria agradecer o convite do pessoal do NIC por ter aceito a nossa apresentação.
First of all, I'd like to thank Nick BR for accepting our presentations. So please bear with me. This is a very technical topic. I will avoid too much technical information, and I will emphasize some aspects regarding technology. FlowSpec, that's like sex during adolescence. Everybody says they do it, but they don't know exactly how to do it. So FlowSpec, that is the fact. FlowSpec is a quite relevant topic, as FlowSpec hasn't got just a feature to mitigate DDoS. Here we have some recent history about past attacks. We had one last week, a very severe one. Several packages were were attacked. They had 540 Gbps, 1.9 terabytes per second. But that in fact was a carpet bomb attack. They attack all /20 IP, and they would alternate every 15 minutes, maybe to hide that attack. And during the Olympic events, we had over a week of attacks above 1 gigabytes. What does that have to do with FlowSpec? Which sort of tools can we deploy to mitigate that? We have the black hole, SRT, and intelligent mitigation systems. Both here, they help in the attack. When you mitigate that attack, the black hole, that is even more critical because you work with destinies. In this last week attack, which I have just mentioned, there were millions of IPs origin. And to work with a BGP black hole by origin was almost impossible. And with that level of scale, neither intelligent mitigation system can help. You still need an additional tool. And FlowSpec has a role to play here. This is a technology which helps us to treat this high level of attack demands that we have been experiencing lately. So what is that FlowSpec, the flow specification? As if you had an access list and you would display that by BGP, as if it was a policy-based routing, a characterization of a filter where an action would be made. So you may filter by source, protocol, and bits of fragmentation bits, and perform the following actions. Rate limit, if you have a rate limit under 0, that will be understood as a drop. redirect to VRF, set DSCP values, and redirect to IP next hop. That depends on vendors still. Not all versions, not all manufacturers had applied that. What about the history of flow spec? An initial draft was done with engineers by June and some other market engineers that started to be designed in 2007. It was introduced by Alcatel-Lucent in 2011. We had the 75 RFS in 2011 that tried to organize that mess between the implementation done by vendors. In 2014, we had the flow spec implementation by Cisco and some other improvements. October 2015, we have a new RFC proposed. What about challenges? Vendor support. Why? That's a new technology. It depends on different versions. You have to validate bugs, infrastructure impacts, specifications in flight. RFC, as many other protocols and technologies, we had the flow spec idea in mind, and that became a standard. And operational challenges, any sort of care that you have to have in the network to avoid the flow spec to become an additional problem. We have some vendor limits, and what impacts us the most is features parity. Sometimes we have a network with several vendors and each one of them offering a different support, and redirect sometimes is different from vendor to vendors, and how Cisco would accept the flag to redirect to the next hop or to the VRF, which is different from Juniper and Alcatel. So if you work with several vendors at your network, it's difficult to have just one orchestra to guide that. That works like a CL. Each vendor has a limit in terms of rules to be installed, to be deployed. Alcatel-Lucent has a limit of 512, Cisco 3,000 entries, and Juniper 8,000 entries. Cisco numbers are calculated by line cards. Visibility. No standards for reporting, such as collecting anything else. No. Today, we just collect any information over NetFlow or via NetFlow, as if the router would be disposed, and the same takes place with CL. Arbor characterizes the drop by flow spec via NetFlow, and the flow spec is in action. We have some query routers. They are vendor independent, and eventually you may have an external solution, but there is no standard. That's still a challenge. We believe that by the next few years, we'll be able to have a more standardized way to work with the flow spec with different vendors. Traffic rate. Traffic rate with a value of 0 means dropout traffic. BPS only, limit per router. If you want to filter, you limit your filters. Let's say that you just want to let 200 kbytes per second get into the network, but this is a rule that you apply per router. Routers, they do not communicate among them. Any carried out tests, they were very effective in terms of a blockage. But when I work with the traffic rate that's not guaranteed. Nothing is guaranteed. I saw lots of disparities before in terms of bits per second representations. We have an interface set where they install a PBR, policy-based routing. It's possible to set up routing policies different from the basic IP table that the IP has. And FlowSpec does that exactly. I have no presentation addressing that, but let me highlight CPU use. I had a chance to test CPU use for at Cisco, not Alcatel yet. One allows FS rules to only be applied, and once that is applied, that is fine. There is no CPU weight to support the flow spec. You can have that in your network safely, especially in case of any attacks that may be filtered by flow spec.
Other flow spec characteristics, which is the traffic return, we have some operators here, and they use the Argo technology for mitigation, and we can re-inject the traffic no longer by GRE, but with a redirect with flow spec to a VPN. So here, uh, how does it work? I have the traffic coming into the network. The rule is applied in the entry interface. This is the example I mentioned. This slide was to be in a different position, but anyway. But basically, this is the GRE explanation. When you don't use the flow stack and you have this deviation to the router, you return this to the backbone. If you work in the route global, if the mitigator returns to the global table, it generates a loop. So the simpler way was to create a tunnel from the mitigator to the client. With the flow spec, here at the entry point, you have a flow spec role characterizing the client or the attack, and with an action as a redirect to the VPN. Instead of going to the backbone to the mitigator, a transport to the dirty VPN, and when the equipment returns to the network, returns in the global that does not know the redirect route, and with this it goes to the clear or traffic to the client. We can talk about this later on if you want more information. FlowSpec in IPv6. It's a technology that is not new, but as any other, it follows the market demand. Today, we do have FlowSpec in V6. I tested some basic features, and I found some problems related to redirect for route and EVF. Since the RFC is not complete, I don't think you have any great need. We from Arbor, we see that the attacks in IPv6 are minimal. Not that it doesn't occur, but there is this concern. The Harbor and the other technologies support IPv6, but when implementing, we will rely on the help or support of the vendor. It's a very simple setting. It's very technical. I won't go deep, but you include the IPv4 flow spec and Cisco with the peer that we will announce to you. You enable in the peer setup, and also the IPv6. And then you have the analog, but in one single line, you set it up. And in the orchestrator, flow spec is very similar to BGP. The peer announces. In the case of the flow spec, we can this entity as an orchestrator. This is a urban configuration or setup example where you could use another router in the network and set it up as an orchestra. As I said, the configuration or the setup is by per interface. It has a great impact, expected for the operator. You can take out the interfaces that you don't want to include, but there is some questioning. Some clients asking the operator to have a full spec announcement with all these limits of line cards and vendors. But the more impacting is the way that full spec is applied and how the operator will work, because you're connected to an access link and the flow spec is not enabled in the exit or out and port. You are not going to be done in your interface, but in the interface that connects to the backbone interface. This is critical. Flow spec has techniques for you to have filters to prevent an operator or user to install a filter, but it's related to scalability. This is very new to think this way. Many operators accept announcement of a backhaul, and obviously you see the possibility. So I will get the flow spec because it's more refined, but we need to wait for it really to mature. This is the command for you to see flow spec in Cisco. You have the rule installed here. You the blockade is action is to drop to the destination 777/70T, destination 0, origin port 0. An idea. We know the attacks for amplification. This would be nice to block these attacks that use fixed origin ports. For Juniper, this is the rule, and diverting with a flow spec. The divert techniques for mitigation. This is a graphic example, more technical. This is the internet. This is the network P, and this is the SCUB center. But basically, to have this diversion, the most used technique would be a VRF light, a routing table separate from this router. But this is limiting. The, the diverting for flow spec allows you to have this announcement in a dynamic way. And what you do, we have a rule here that destroys 211 in the port 80. We see the attack here. I will have an action that will be target VRF. I will deviate the traffic with this characteristic that I gave this name here. So now all packages are included in this VPN and delivered outside the global table. And this returns the clean traffic to the global. I'm not saying that GRS is the only option for backbone technology. With a good engineering, you can adopt the best technique, taking into consideration the entire operational cost. But in GRE, basically, this technique provides you again in terms of complexity. Well, since it's a new technology, we saw it is quite limiting in terms of vendor support. So it's necessary to have some good practices. Flow spec, okay, does it work? Yes, it does. but infrastructure comes first. I need to analyze my infrastructure for flow spec that is applied in the entry interface, know your victim, not only the attacked, but sometimes the victim can be your router, how your router would behave and understand your capabilities, what you can do. Flow spec, it's not a magic tool, it's an auxiliary tool. We have some attacks in terms of volumetry. Many times the technology does not scale in such an agile way. And since we have technologies like FlowSpec that you can deal with attacks in a very efficient way, it's worth in although I'm a vendor of mitigation equipment, we work with full solution, and FlowSpec is an auxiliary tool allowing you to have a mitigation gain in your current infrastructure, basically for attacks with simple characteristics. So NTP, SSDP, charging, MSSQL, basically you look at the origin port and the origin protocol. So you can filter very effectively. FlowSpec is perfect for this. But obviously for DNS and SYN attacks, SYN should be the greatest challenge. Can you give up a FlowSpec? Yes, but you should be much more granular and cautious than with the other protocols. With all these possibilities, you need to analyze your SLA. If you have an attack greater than your mitigation capacity, so you have to consider all the business need. Who is the client? If I apply a backhole, what is the capacity of the mitigator? And beside the equipment that will receive the FlowSpec announcement, you need to make take some measures, especially with the BGP prefix. What is the maximum prefix that the client can announce? I create the amount of announcements per minute. Everything must be included in your FlowSpec policy to avoid problems, but the most important is to respect your hardware capacity, to run tests, work with the vendor, but FlowSpec is a very important tool, especially for the attacks we've seen in Brazil recently. We have the control of announcements, of update rates, prefix max validation, very similar to BGP, prefix count restriction, and commit. And here, an option that Arbor provides you with a FlowSpec, so when they analyze an attack, it can validate the origin and use the FlowSpec to decrease the load of package access. Well, the policy, it can be global with all routers or regional. It's nice to apply regionally due to the characteristics of the protocol, the way it's distributed, and the risk you may run if you apply it globally. So if you segment it, is much more interesting for the health of the network. Okay, I think that I closed 40 seconds before. I don't know if you have room to Q&A. I know it's a very extremely technical subject, so that's why I decided to provide you an overview. You can start thinking about it as a mitigation tool.
Tiago Sete, da Algar Telecom.
Imagina. Congratulations for your presentation. A question. You mentioned, but I'd like you to elaborate on your experience or Arbor experience in the use of flow spec and BGP connections. Is there anyone doing this? Or did they do and then they gave up? And what about the future? Is this something that will evolve? Will have this in the industry as ordinary, or is it something that will now not take off? Well, we can talk about the whole implementation. It was very similar. We had a pressure from the market, clients who had an autonomy to block. In the flow spec, I think that the uh, path is similar. Is there someone doing this? No, because this flow spec is applied in the entry interface. If it was applied in the exit interface, would be better. The technology does not allow this. And the other is the hardware limit. Again, the operator has its own need. Operators in Brazil use FlowSpec? Yes, most of them for internal use when their structure is not prepared for a big attack. So your question is related to automation. I have a BGP to the operator. As I announced in the EPv4, I want to announce this. They don't do this because they have a limitation in Cisco and Bridge. This is a relatively low number when we talk about DDoS attack, when you have origin variation. I think it's something that will happen invariably, but the velocity will depend on how the vendors will uh, implement secure techniques to allow the operators to offer. To the operator is an advantage. If you have a control way to allow the client to protect itself, it's an operational advantage. This doesn't happen today and will not happen in the midterm future due to this complexity to implement.
Obrigado.
Thank you. Any other question? I'm Antonio Moreira from Niki, but the question came from a chat with Igor. I don't know if I will express it correctly, but you mentioned that, in your opinion, the operators are not making available this due to technical restrictions. I'd like to know if it's not related to market restrictions. You have a much more profitable services. You are offering a service of clear traffic, and so you don't offer this as an alternative to protect. I understood the question. Okay. Operators today use it to protect their clients, but in an invisible way. There is not this visible for the client. But are they going to do this as a service? Well, in the first moment, I would say no. Today, it's not like this. If this will happen in the future, it's difficult to say. But what's limiting today is the way that a flow spec is applied, the weight, not in terms of CPU, but in terms of risks. I heard today of cases of flow spec use that caused the problems to the network, even used internally. When you talk about operators' backbone, it's like a castle of cards. You need to be very careful. Any new way of routing, it can impact all the other cards, not only the client, but the other ones, and like a domino effect. So it's not a simple decision. I had meetings with operators talking about this model. I was question about this. What I can say today is that the technical module does not accommodate this. In the future, if we'll have this more mature, well, it is difficult to say. Maybe it's a feasible option. Maybe the cost effectiveness, especially in terms of the scale of attacks, will be nice. But today is quite complex. Who would give up? Those who want to do this would have to run a big risk. Okay, so thank you very much.
Alô? Bom,
So next in our agenda, once again, let me thank our sponsors, Facebook, Netflix, APS, Equinix, PX Technologies, Electronet, Corient, Semig Telecom, Juniper, Binario, TDEC, Fonet, Hucos, and Google, Abranet, and NNTT. Our next talk will be in English, so please grab your simultaneous translation equipment if you need one. And Andrea Robachevsky from ISOX will address the Routing Manifest. You have the floor. Welcome.
I'll open this later. That's fine. I'll put this. We can put this now.
Mas this no, not.
Pack your bags and leave this town. I don't wanna see you coming round. No, I don't wanna waste my precious time again. With the Star Trek sticker on your Cadillac. I don't wanna see you coming back. No, I don't wanna see your gloomy face again.
Yeah, okay. Hi everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present this initiative to you. My name is Andrei Robachevsky. I work for the Internet Society. And one of my main tasks at the Internet Society is to coordinate and help develop this community initiative project, which is called MANAS, and it stands for Mutually Agreed Norms for Routing Security. So before we talk about the initiative, let's talk about the problem first a little bit. And I'm sure you know the problem, but let me spend a couple of minutes just recapping this to sort of present the scale and the problem itself more clearly. So you know that we have about 60,000 networks, what we call autonomous systems, operating on the internet. Those autonomous systems, they use BGP to exchange reachability information about, among themselves. And each network makes its own selections based on this information and propagates this information further. Right. So BGP, the Border Gateway Protocol, plays a crucial role in exchanging this information. So, so what's the problem? Right. We have to be quick. Right. So BGP is based entirely on trust. There is no built-in mechanism in the protocol itself to validate whether the announcements you receive from your neighbor are correct or not. So you have to use some out-of-band measures to validate this information, or, as many networks do, don't validate this information at all. And what also happens that the network receiving this information, applying its routing policy, passes this information further along. And if it's a false, incorrect information, it will go on and on and on. And that's why routing problems span continents. They spread very quickly. One of the problems is BGP, of course, but another problem is that there is also lack of data that network operators can use to validate this information. This data is largely incomplete and also incorrect. And, well, that leads to headlines, routing incidents, cutting off the internet, countries sometimes even regions. They do not last long, I have to admit, but they create a lot of problems. I pulled this data from the service called BGP Stream and plotted this on this timeline, and you can see there is no single day without an incident. It's either hijack or route leak every day, and it's not just one, not just two, it's about hundreds, tens of incidents that are happening. What's behind these incidents? Well, prefix hijacks, when a network announces a prefix that doesn't belong to it, right? It shouldn't originate. And other networks believe this information. What happens is that traffic goes to these networks, and in many cases, it creates a denial of service attack. Route leaks, it's a violation of so-called valley-free routing principle. When, for instance, your customer re-announces prefix that customer learned from you about, let's say, Google network to another transit provider, and all of a sudden becomes this transit provider for Google traffic, which also leads to denial of service attacks. I'm talking about mistakes, and many of them are configuration mistakes. And that's also a problem in itself, that routing system is so fragile, is so sensitive to those configuration mistakes. But they're also malice, because route hijacks and route leaks can be used in rerouting traffic through networks, through malicious networks, And for instance, route leaks is an excellent way for reconnaissance activities, when you can scan the traffic that is passing your network and get all interesting information about ports open, services accessed, and so on and so forth. That's a passive way to get this information. Not an active scan, but stealthy, passive way to get this information to prepare a more massive attack. And of course, IP address spoofing, and because routing on the internet doesn't require source address, it doesn't check source address, in principle, you can spoof without, if network doesn't do extra protection. So I pulled some statistics for Brazil. And I pulled statistics from BGP Mon for 3 months this quarter. And you can see there were about 1,000 incidents. 3/4 of those incidents were outages. And prefixes disappeared for a certain duration of time, and there was no reachability for those destinations. But 1/4 of all incidents are route leak and route hijacks that either involved Brazilian ISN as a culprit, so it was a mistake on the Brazilian ISP, or a victim. So something occurred to the prefixes of this Brazilian ISP, and therefore connectivity was distorted. And well, I would say maybe some of those incidents you haven't noticed. Maybe you attributed those incidents to something else. Maybe there was like, well, problems with reachability. And as I say, some of those incidents do not last too long, but they create problems. They create also problems in debugging the problems in your network. So are there solutions? Well, I wouldn't say solutions, but tools definitely there are. And they existed for decades. Well, previous presentation presented some of the tools, like prefix ACLs, IS path filtering, the new technologies coming in like RPKI, BGPsec. Those standards were just standardized recently in the IETF. We'll have to wait, of course, till the deployment takes on and those technologies are deployed. But there is lack of deployment, we understand that. And there's also lack of reliable data. You need to have data to make those routing decisions. It's a so-called tragedy of the commons. Because from the routing perspective, security of your own network, it's in some other hands. It's other network operators that secure your own network. For instance, well, we all remember probably a notorious YouTube incident back in 2008. It's a classic incident that everyone uses to describe a problem in the routing system, a routing hijack, when Pakistan Telecom announced YouTube prefixes, and almost more than half of the internet believed that, and traffic was directed to Pakistan Telecom instead of YouTube. There was a 2 hours outage for YouTube globally. So YouTube could have done only so little to protect themselves, right? It was Pakistan Telecom and their providers who had to take measures to protect YouTube. So you see, it's a big disconnect. But what does it mean? That means the more hands, the more network operators implement those measures, the more protected our network is. And also there is another problem. There is no clear defined line between good and bad. Like, do you implement AS filtering? Do you implement ACLs and prefix filtering? No, well, okay. So there is no sort of peer pressure where we say, this is unacceptable and this is okay. So here we go to manners, because manners tries to address both of those facets of the problem. And manners, although it's presented on ISOC template, and I work for ISOC, it's really an industry initiative. It was started by network operators, and network operators are actually the driving force behind this initiative. It's based on collaboration because, as I said, there's this disconnect because you have to motivate others to protect your own network, and that's a difficult task. So manners defines this baseline. It's really a minimum baseline It's not the best current practice. It defines 4 actions that network operators absolutely should implement. Those actions are designed for low cost and low risk. So they're very limited in scope. It's a minimum set of requirements. It's basic hygiene. And Manas builds a visible community. And that's part of the reason I'm presenting this to you, because you are the community. So if you embrace Manas, this community becomes stronger. And it will create gravity, and it will create peer pressure. Let me give you an overview of those actions. And if you look at them, you would say, hey, well, we all know about this. We all talk about this for years, and maybe something happens, but we're not sure. We still talk about the same problem. Now, those things we talked about, but those actions in Manas, they, as I said, optimize for low cost and low risk. For instance, filtering, it only applies to a customer code. Because you should know what your customers are supposed to be announcing. The same applies for anti-spoofing. Operators say, well, anti-spoofing, it's risky. It also has performance implications. But if you apply this to single home stop customers, and those configurations exist, the majority of those configurations at the edge, that's very simple to implement. Things called coordination, keeping your contact information up to date and being responsive, is it that difficult to do? And of course, global validation doesn't mean that network operators start performing global validation. No, but they contribute. They make it more easily implemented by others by publishing this data, making data about what others should expect from them available. And that contributes to the problem that there is lack of resource data, IRRs, RPKI, and other repositories that contain this information. Just a word on Manas limitation. As I said, that's not the best current practice. It's a really minimum norm. It's not a firewall, right? So if a network implements Manas, it doesn't mean that it protects itself from all these routing problems, but it definitely contributes to the overall security of the system, and it builds this network. It joins the club of security-minded network operators that can collaborate. So why join? Well, one thing is, if you apply routing hygiene, I think debugging of other problems becomes easier, right? You have a cleaner setup, troubleshooting becomes easier. Another reason is what I said. If you implement those measures, return on investment, the benefits you're getting from those measures depend on how many other networks implement this thing. So Manas, the main objective of this initiative to motivate others to implement those things. So if you join, if you increase the gravity of this effort, you will certainly motivate others better. But we're also thinking, well, there might be some market forces. We're not leveraging market forces to motivate people to implement those measures. I think we will not get a lot of traction. So what we did this year, we conducted a research with the help of an analyst company that did a survey among 250 enterprises and their service providers to see their perceptions about Manas as a project. It was a pretty comprehensive study. It was limited to North America, but I think the results are, can be extended to other regions as well. As I said, 250 enterprises of different sizes and about 25 service providers also of different sizes. So what we learned from this study? Well, not a secret, and security is very vital to enterprises. It's one of the objectives, and it's on the growth. Enterprises are spending more and more on security, not necessarily routing security, but security in general. When it comes to connectivity, their security objectives are very much aligned with Manas, and enterprises are willing to explore those requirements in their procurement process. For instance, when you're looking for a connectivity provider, enterprises are willing to look for Manas compliance service provider. And that backs back to service providers. Manus adds value. In this vague market, when price is the driving factor of connectivity market, I mean, being able to differentiate is very important. And service providers, they see this as a way, because enterprise can recognize this Manus sign if awareness is good enough. And based on Manus, based on these simple things, you can make steps further and you create additional revenue streams on transferring yourself from just a simple connectivity provider to a security partner. Let me quickly go through some of those results. Well, this is a result that security concerns of the enterprises. And you see traffic hijacking and spoofing are among big ones, big concerns. That's why I said the objectives, because Manus is trying to address exactly those concerns, are very much aligned. When enterprise were asked whether they're willing to pay premium for a Manus-compliant provider, they actually said yes. Well, let's be honest. One thing is answering a survey, another thing is signing a contract. But still, that means that service providers, if Manus is a recognized trust mark or quality mark among enterprises, there is a possibility to, get some competitive advantage and get a little less discounting, for instance, in negotiation process. And there is a gap, because when we asked service providers about Manus, none of them believed their customers could require that. And well, not surprising, really, because enterprises do not know a lot about Manus, but service providers didn't think that their customers might be interested in that stuff. So, just to recap, why enterprise should require Manus. First of all, to increase own organizational security posture, right? If enterprise is looking seriously at security, building its own security organization, working on security processes, I think supply chain management, Manus fits very well in this part and those processes. Manus addresses the problems that enterprises care about. That's very important. And Manus provides a foundation for security value-added services. So, for instance, based on those controls that service provider implements, those controls can generate important information security streams that enterprises really value. And on the other side, why service providers should value, as I said, it's an opportunity to differentiate. It's not only price that matters, it's also security. It's a value-added service. It's a way to lock in, because if it's only price, then switching from one service provider to another is quite easy. If it's a partnership based on security, on unique capabilities, I think that's different. And of course, that's also part of the spirit of Manus Enterprises to help solve global network problems. Right? Because ultimately, if you do this stuff, you contribute to the overall security of the routing infrastructure, which we all rely on. So why to join Manus? And this is mainly for you, for service providers. Improve your own security posture and reduce number and impact of routing incidents. If your setup is clean, if you apply hygiene, troubleshooting is easier. And you also prevent some of the things happening. For instance, in your customer cone, right? Your customers will not, attract unwanted traffic, for instance. Join the community of security-minded operator. If you implement Manus norms and you can stand up and publicly say, yes, I care about routing security, I prepare to spend resources on it, I implement those easy things and I go further, and I'm prepared to state it publicly. So I'm prepared to be held accountable by the community itself. And of course, use Manus as a competitive differentiator. And we're working on that. We're making Manus mark more visible also to enterprises, to your potential customers. So there will be sort of a win-win situation. Please go to this website. It contains a lot of resources. It also contains the current members of Manus. You can look at them. You can look at the actions. Not all actions are required to implement, to join Manus. The majority of actions are required to be implemented if you want to join Manus. You join this community of security-minded operators, which opens new opportunities, things that you can discuss that you would not be comfortable discussing in large public forums, for instance. You get access to expertise as well, so that's very important. There's some other things that we're doing. So to reduce the threshold for joining Manus, we, and when I say we, it's not ISOC, it's actually a group of network operators again, developed an implementation guide. Because while those 4 actions are pretty simple, we felt that we need to provide additional guidance for network operators on how to actually implement those actions. And we thought it would be a very easy exercise, that would be an instruction set that would fit on 1 or 2 pages. Well, unfortunately, the document is now 50 pages, and not all of them is just 1, 2, 3 instructions. So, not the secret routing security is hard. But this BCOP document that passed the BCOP process with operators vetting, it's available on Manus website as well. Went further, and the document is good, but hands-on training and education can promote Manus even better and enable operators to implement those things and join Manus. So this year we're completing online modules. There will be 5 modules, 1 for each action and 1 module, introductory module for Manus. And next year we are working on training, hands-on lab. We are also looking to partner with existing training organizations to fit this in their curricula. So as a standalone module or as an end exam, for instance, when students will be required to configure Manus actions in a simple topology network, just to demonstrate their knowledge of BGP. But along with that, they will be capable to go back to their networks and implement those actions there. Another important thing is IXP partnership program, because IXPs are more just, well, some of them are operators, of course, but they are more than that. They have communities. They have communities with common operational objective and would like to get IXPs on board. One of the important principles of Manus is you cannot just declare your support for routing security or your concern about those problems, right, by putting your logo on the website. You have to demonstrate commitment. And for network operators, this commitment is expressed in 4 actions. Now we're completing work on actions that would be applicable for IXPs and IXPs that can implement those actions and be compliant will join. We're planning to launch this program early next year, and that's called IXP Partnership Program. So IXPs will become a separate category of Manus membership, bring their communities along. As I said, this is the URL, so if you go there, that would be, you'll find more information there. And I would like to finish up this presentation with a short poll. First of all, how many, I should have asked this question before, how many of you heard of Manus before that presentation? Can you raise your hands? Okay, well, that's not a small amount. But I hope I provide some more information here. So this QR code and this URL, if you go there, that's a voting URL. You will be presented with a set of questions. I'll go through the questions and we'll see the results online. I'll give you some time before I start the poll. So you should be seeing now that the poll is about to start soon. Yeah, please.
Fone aqui. Opa, obrigado. Pessoal, então, eu acho que uma coisa importante aí vocês terem em mente o que o André colocou na apresentação.
It's important to have in mind what André mentioned in his presentation. the four major points of demands manifest.
Resumidly, the four actions.
Yes, the four actions are, first action is filtering. So you
Filtrar,
apply
a primeira ação.
prefix filtering for your customers and your own infrastructure, your customer code. That's the scope of this action.
Então a primeira ação que o manifesto pede é que você
First action is to filter the prefixes that come from your clients to identify, well, is this client announcing his own prefixes? Do they have the right?
So you prevent traffic with spoofed source IP addresses. And again, this is applied to configurations when you have a single home stop customer and your own infrastructure.
Então a segunda ação é ter o anti.
Então, the second is to have anti-spoofing, not to allow false IPs or from other networks leaving your network. We have information of this in bcp.nic.br, and
Coordination, you publish contact information of your NOC, and it's available. It's not outdated information. You publish this in one of the known databases, like in Brazilian NIC database, or in PeeringDB, or in IRR.
Então a terceira ação.
The third action is to keep the data updated to coordination in the BR register to be with updated data in abuse in 6BR, in RR, or any other information source, contact data for any problem for others to be able to contact your network.
We call it global validation, but in fact it's facilitating global validation by publishing the announcements other people should expect from you in known databases, be it routing registry or RPKI repository.
Então a quarta ação é você usar.
The fourth action is to use public bases to announce what you are going to do in BGP. Use IPK that is not available or so these are the four actions. And now Andre is proposing this survey that you can access with the QR code or link. I'm just helping here to encourage you to answer this survey. We have 4 questions.
I think there will be 4 questions, and we'll start with a general question. Are you guys ready? Have you got to this URL? Okay, let me start. So
Okay.
This is the first question, and we'll see. You have to vote. You're presented with a set of answers. Unfortunately, I cannot see the answer. But Antonio, maybe you can translate the answers.
Tá cortado aqui, o pessoal não consegue. O pessoal aí do audiovisual parece que tá cortado aqui na tela. Se vocês puderem ajustar. Mas a questão é se você já sofreu ou sofre frequentemente aí.
The question is if you have suffered or if you usually suffer security incidents. The first you suffer with impact, without impact. The third I don't know, I don't measure, and the fourth is no. We have no security problems. These are incidents with BGP and with routing. Okay.
The voting process stabilized, so we can move to another.
So the
Chance. Okay, moving to second question.
Então a segurança no roteamento é importante para a sua.
Is routing security important to your network? No, it does not affect. Yes, but we don't have resources. Yes, I already implement actions. Yes, I'd like to be part of more months.
To the second one, to the third one.
Does your network already implement demands proposals? How many of the actions we have just commented you already implement? Be honest, okay? Nobody is going to get your mobile IP. Nobody is going to check. So please be honest.
Absolutely honest.
Honestidade absoluta.
Great, thank you. And next question.
Acho que é a última questão.
This is the last one. In case you implement, when you implement the proposed actions, would you sign the manifest officially? Would you include the man's stamp on your company, or would you have any restrictions concerning that?
In Manus, you have to implement majority of Manus actions, meaning 3 or 4 actions have to be implemented.
Ok. But the question is if the people agree to implement in the future, if they would join MERS officially.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's it. So those are very interesting results, and thank you very much. I think that's very positive. Yeah, Antonio, I kind of forgot the questions in English, but I think those are positive results, right? What we saw, people in general, they are. There is a good deal of network operators that already Manus compliant, and a lot of operators actually willing to lead by example and understand the purpose of Manus and are willing to join either now, because those who compliant, I assume they were in this category that said we will join and lead by example, but those who will implement and maybe get their security up to scratch, they will join Manus soon. Well, thank you very much for this poll and for listening to me. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Bom, eu gostaria de agradecer aos nossos patrocinadores, o Facebook.
I'd like to thank our sponsors, Netflix, T6, Netronet, Fórum, Telecom, Juniper, TEDEC, Extreme, Phonet, Ruckus, and especially Google, Abranet, and NTT. Now we have a coffee break, and we'll be back at 11. And more information about security we will discuss in a panel right after the break. Okay, see you later.
it's a frightening display.
Olá, pessoal. Muito bom dia novamente.
So, hi folks, good morning again. I'm Frederico Neves. I work at NIC BR. And to continue with the IX Forum, we'll have a panel with representatives from the industry talking about the launch of a program to have a more secure internet, especially at the infrastructure level in the country. And for this panel, we'd like to invite Andrei Robajewski from ISOC. Andrei, please. Also, Christine Hopers from Search BR. She will make an initial presentation sharing the scenario we have in Brazil and what Search BR is identifying. And Eduardo Parajo from Abranet and Ideu Borges from Singitele Brasil. We also would have Basilius' presentation from a branch, but unfortunately he had a last-minute problem. We will have a presentation and then a discussion. It will be very important for the members of the community to give their opinion, to participate, and share with us how they see the current scenario and their local view of these very places we have the internet in Brazil, whether in large cities or small cities, probably where internet happens in this country, and to share their point of view so we can improve the situation, especially concerning what Chris is going to present us. So, Christine, you have the floor. Good morning. Thank you, Fred, for the introduction. When Andre was presenting or introducing MENS, he mentioned some difficulties and abuses we see in the internet. And I will share with you local numbers in Brazil. What we see today, that is most of the abuses of autonomous system using these resources and attacking third parties network. These are autonomous systems. You know that many activities are kept by NIC, and in our activities we had two areas, which is incident treatment and where we collect metrics about the incidents and what are the major problems of setup problems or where is the root of the problem. I will share some data on three biggest sources. The most is the notification of we have in our medium. These are voluntary notifications detected by you, by other networks or autonomous systems around the world that contact us saying there is a Brazilian network with a security problem, and we get in contact to help them. The other source of data are data connected by low interactivity. These are totally passive network of sensors, like weather sensors. They look at the wind and what is going through the network, what they detect, malicious codes, and attackers looking for vulnerable systems. And we had another source of data, international organizations that share with us data that are called IOCs, which are indicators of problems or bad configured Brazilian networks that are being abused. And we'll see how these three sources of data with a different view of the problem, what they are seeing. So starting with the notified incidents, we have the annual statistics published in our website, but what called my attention in the last year that are trends that we haven't seen for such a long time. One was the increase of DOS, and although denial of service is an attack that we know that is it comes in a report here, you talk here and there, but it's difficult a person to notify, I received this and that. And even though we saw a great increase in the last 3 years, from 2014, we had a 200-fold increase, and this number was almost stable, and in 2016 this notification doubled. What we see of those who notify saying that was a victim is that the large attacks are no longer 20. I had an attack that put me down 300 megabits, but we had one saying that we had a peak that reached 1 tera. So the normal level was also changed. But what we receive complaints are Brazilian networks generating denial of service, not only to other Brazilian networks, but to networks around the world. Usually are botnets, but in these botnets we also have included the CPS, the broadband routers, and traffic amplification. And I will go deeper on specific numbers of application and how it works. The scanning part, what we highlight, if you look at the graph, 3/4 are port 22, 23, and 25. And it's interesting to see port 22 and 23, they are looking for modems, board edge router servers, and IoT in general, that many times the managers even don't know this is being enabled by standard password. And port 25, this was the first, but we see this people trying to guess login and password, but through email for phishing. But we see we have a relationship between the scanning and the type of botnet that is being used. In our honeypot, honeypots, there is nobody saying that that network attacked me. But we see the volume of botnets and honeypots propagating, and how much the attackers are actively looking for this activity. In this honeypots project, this will be on the IX webpage, but every day we have the flow of the highest traffic for attack. This was Saturday, and you can see number one, Telnet, hiding all the rest. It's such a big search for Telnet. We had 1.4 gigabits or kbits per second, and then 125 mega. The difference is very big, but it's quite similar to our information Telnet, SSH. Then we had ports as 23, N5555 abused by the Mirai botnet. They explore broadband modems, so it's very specific. If you have any questions, I'll be here the entire day to talk about this. But what else are we seeing? This is a summary of the year. It's not only people reporting, yes, but actively they are looking for standard passwords. We have other doors associated with TNP for broadband. We see the exploration of Mirai in the broadband variant, and something that does not stop is the search for DP services to give a denial of service and amplify traffic. Just to remind those who are not used on how attacked with an amplification or reflection works, this is a specific example of a DNS. This is specific for DNS. The amplification attack, as Andre mentioned in his speech, the attacker is in a network that allows you to build a package, a forged package, and send it through the internet. This attacker will have a DNS consultation to a server that it controls or to a hacker that has a great response. Usually we are talking about 2-3K response. The question is asked is not direct. A question goes to a set of DNS servers with open recurrency. It's a DNS with recursion or recursion of your Wi-Fi, and it responds to the entire world. So anyone in the world can ask a question and it responds. When you forge or fake the IP of the victim and you create a recursive long list, you put it on the in cache. So you have a number of bytes and then the multiplier traffic. And in general, it's 100 times. So for every megabit, it's 100 megabits. In 2009, we had an Arbor annual report saying that 20 PCs infected by a bot that consulted with an open recursive server would generate. Can you see this leaving your network? Is if you have an open recursive. And we are looking in the scanning, but data provided by partners, we have a number that is very interesting. How many IP addresses in Brazil and how many autonomous systems are allowing the amplification of traffic? And the number is not encouraging. We from CERT-BR, since we are a national CERT responsible, we have the data of shadow servers and autonomous systems in Brazil. And once a week, we notify, we test all the IP addresses to confirm if they are allowing notification, and we inform this autonomous system. We notify about this. So for you to have an idea, DNS, we are 1/3 of the Brazilian ASs that are allowing notification, one or more IP. It's about 80, 60, it goes up and down. You have the variability. But The other characteristics is that probably they are broadband routers who are coming from factory with this. And SNP, we have more than 1,000 autonomous system notified, and the number of IP is much bigger. And they are also broadband routers that come open from the factory responding publicly. So it's a problem. NPP is the same, the AAS number is different, and SSDP is smaller. Other protocols are being abused, but in lower scale. This is something we see that we are seeing so much complaint that Brazil is generating denial of service because we do have a high volume of networks badly configured that are allowing the amplification, and this is very worrying. So we have three sets of data that, in our point of view, they complement one the another, giving a better idea of the healthy state of our internet. And since we are talking about security and elements like mode and broadband router and security in routing, we have some other abuses. The first one is happening since 2013. I think many people have already seen a presentation talking about this problem of attacks to broadband routers to change or to alter DNS. The way they are compromised is very similar like the botnets are doing.
Geralmente via telnet, então mesmo que
usually even if you have this net in your router or exploring vulnerabilities because you have many, or what we see are cross-site CSRF attacks. They compromise a discussion forum or or broadly assess the site. Why it's going to announce it includes a hidden script in a zero frame, and then it looks the password exploring vulnerabilities in the router, and when possible it alters the DNS setup, not to to have a consult of your DNS, but a different one. And we see this since 2003. The cases are for all types of domains, social, news sites, and we don't have any metric. It's impossible to have metrics for all Brazilian AES.
But what we have been following is the number of malicious servers, maybe an outside, an external hosting company, which is answering in a malicious way, and that number never goes any under 40. But finally, it's not very frequently hosted in Brazil. If that happens, they just stay for 10 to 15 minutes live, and then they are taken away. But some of them, they are kept longer, unfortunately. So you can tell the size of the abuse, how abusive that matter may be. And for fraud reasons, routing hijack, that started last March, and that's not the type of BGP hijack, no. It's a different one. They go to an autonomous system, usually small. They invade the router. Password, management password, accessing the interface. And they announce an additional router usually slash 24 of the institution that they want to fraud, and any traffic that gets to them will go to an outside server with the attacker control. This is a different type of attack, though, that we see. And reaching my final remarks, let me tell you what's the root cause of that. Well, are they sophisticated attacks? No, they are not. They find out about login passwords of equipment administration, servers, routers, broadband modem devices, and open services for amplification purpose. And today there is a huge amount which is under those modes. Recommendations, authentication. We have to have two factors, if not two, and maybe SSH with a password, not a cryptographic one, but anything else. If there is no second factor, there is a management one. And maybe you can do something else. Let's not forget that many routers, such as MikroTik, they go with the flow with several access ways. SSH is there, Internet Web, FTP, everything is there. Forgetting changing your password, leave the standard one. That can be a problem. And as to amplification, we have two sides there. Something that should reduce spoofing. We have 500,000 IPs that may generate acceleration of SLMP in Brazil. So we have to act to reduce open services, standard open services. The router that you have, that you buy to put in your client's house, it comes by default with that. We should have a general hardware and just let whatever it should stay. We have several good practices that are in the good practice portal for internet in Brazil. There is one for anti-spoofing. We have some documents to let us know how to decrease the DDoS access, how to close the DNS, and we hope we can have other good practices. And anything else will be published in this website. That's it for now, folks. Thank you. By the end of the panel, I will try to list what are the initiatives done by NIC-BR, what can we do, how can we help. But the goal of this panel is to involve as much as possible our community. This is a problem that relies on anyone, and we need joint collaboration. Fine? If possible, Andre, could you summarize
get from the poll that you did during your presentation? O Andrei vai tentar fazer sumário aí do que a gente tem, pelo menos do ponto de vista.
Well, Andre will try to summarize and give his take on what he believes the good manners, best practices can help us, how to behave when you are inside the lift at a neighbor's home. That's about the idea of Manners project, right? So just what's your take on that? Thank you. Agradeço.
Interesting presentation with numbers. I think numbers are very important because without measurements, we really don't know how the system is developing, where our weakest spots. Before I go to the results, maybe one comment on the problems we see in the internet, and many of them are not so much of technology, but of socio-economic nature. The thing is, the internet largely is built on economic factors, right? What is profitable, what is important, that stimulates this independent development and interconnectivity in the internet. But at the same time, we see problems that do not have this economic driver, so to say. For instance, you implement anti-spoofing measures, but it doesn't protect your network from denial of service attack. You keep open resolvers running, but the negligence of not closing them down is paid by someone else who is experiencing those DDoS attacks. And in the routing space, what I presented in the Manners presentation is the same. The thing is, you may not validate announcements, but someone else will pay for that, right? So I think important, if we want to tackle those problems, it's important that we find a way to bridge this. And I think what was more pronounced at the early years of the internet, where collaboration was very important, and one of the reasons why security was less important, because people knew each other, so to say. I think this factor needs to be amplified, and ultimately, project like Manners, it works towards that. Because ultimately, we're all interested in our common infrastructure. We rely on that. If it deteriorates, either being used for DDoS attacks, either hosting open resolvers, or being, unstoppable propagation of false routing announcements, we all will suffer from that, right? So I think this collaborative effort is very important because you can see the internet, this full mesh of connectivity is a security chain. And any network may be the weakest link in this chain. So the overall security is as weak or as strong as its weakest link. That's why we take people on board. So ultimately, projects like Manners, they're trying not so much to propose technology solutions, because we knew about those solutions. I'm sure that in those 4 actions you saw nothing very new, but in order to stimulate the motivation to implement those measures and get some rewards, either in terms of peering arrangements or customer provide arrangements, or just being good citizen of the internet. Now let me go to the results, and I find these results. This is, I have to be honest, this is the first time we are creating this sort of survey, and your participation actually encouraged me to now use this tool for every presentation we'll give on Manners. So thank you very much. I think the more polls we get, the more sense of community and attitude towards Manners project we are getting. I have to say that looking at the results, I think looking at the routing incidents, what I see from your answers is that you think routing security is important, but it's not as impactful as probably other things. At least that's your perception. But at the same time, many of you implement those sort of, minimum baseline of routing hygiene, and I'm sure that some of you implement many more things. Majority, I have to say, are prepared to go and promote Manners even further in your community. So this is a great, good sign of a really strong community. I think overall, I see, at least from those who participate in the survey, that majority implements at least 2 actions, which is a great sign, which means you basically can go and sign up for Manners and make this community bigger. And I think the most important that to answer the question, if you implement Manners, would you join this initiative? The vast majority answered yes. I want to lead by example and motivate others to join me in improving routing security. And this is a very this is a great answer to hear, because in many cases people asked us, well, I implement those things, but why would I need to sign up to this initiative? What does it change? And that indicates that they underestimate the power of collaboration, power of motivation, the power of saying, hey, this is the norm, promoting of this norm and motivating this others who haven't implemented these actions to implement those. So this is my short summary. Thank you. Maybe not so short, though.
Se alguém da plateia quiser comentar ou fazer perguntas.
If anyone from the public feels like making any comments, just feel free right now. You don't have to wait for the end of the panel, right? Just raise your hands and the mic will be taken to you. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to say that we are here representing a telco sector which is fully involved in actions that foster internet security. Blockage of door 25, that's a very good example. And that was essential to decrease spam levels generated from Brazil. So worried about Christine's data. Throughout the whole year, we have been discussing, and we know that as part of the telco carriers, they see how severe that problem is. And all companies, they have their security task forces, and they are strongly doing whatever they can for the networks and for the devices. As to devices, and we have to address that topic right now, as we are on board a revolution, which is Internet of Things. Despite being beneficial from a different number of aspects, it replicates and multiplies some of the presented risks. Therefore, if those devices that will be part of Internet of Things, if they are not properly set up, we will see defects and problems related to modem to duplicate significantly. With that in mind, all sectors, telco, devices manufacturers, content companies, I mean, all internet players should be united and working aligned and under the same coordination to guarantee an effective action to minimize risks. From the telco carrier standpoint, we are willing to be intermediates, to work as coordinators, and together with all players, discuss future proactive actions. We will consider months for future deployment. That's it, I guess.
Bom dia a todos, obrigado pelo convite.
Good morning to all of you. Thanks for the kind invitation. And Basilio, he is so sad that he couldn't make here today, but he asked me to let you know that his entity, the entities that he represents, fully support this panel and understands the importance of security. A very important question. Who was attacked in the past 2 weeks? Just 2 of you? DDoS? Just 2 DDoS attacks? 3, 4? Anyone else? No? No more attacks? Don't feel shy. Raise your hands. Or maybe you were attacked and you were not even aware of that. Too bad for you. Maybe your link just went down. Well, the key aspect here, as Christina said, is this initiative. We have to do more and more. Let me exemplify some practical cases here. Sometimes people believe that DDoS attacks, they are just international. They are never domestic. How many of them are coming through the PPT? Anyone? 9 people, 10 people. How come throughout PPT? Probably because networks are not applying security. And we have to be clear enough about that and support such an initiative. There are some technical issues, as Andre just told us, that could be implemented throughout the networks, and that will be a plus and will be more effective in protecting our network. IX has a significant number of INS connected, 1,600, and if those 1,600 ANSs do not have any type of implemented protection, they will work as a significant replicator of the attack. That's why we have to follow closely that initiative in our networks. I have seen several attacks taking place at the network, either to our own networks or to our clients, but I also take into account volume size. Oh man, that's big. A 10 gigabytes link can no longer hold that. There are people taking 50 gigabytes attacking ISAP address outside São Paulo with 1 giga. So anything regarding DNSs, or not letting the anti-spoofing propagate, or creating filters to get third-party prefixes. We are so sure that that prefix comes from that connection. I mean, all these are so essential nowadays. We have larger providers in some regions that provide IP to smaller servers. If that is not properly controlled, some of them are sending attacks to the internet, and they are not even aware of that, believe me. We have we heard our expert on attacks, but still talking about attacks. Before we had several IPs spoofing, attacking one source, one destiny. Now, on the other hand, there are several small attacks. Attack is the whole /22 of the provider, 5 to 6 mega multiplied by 4. And DDoS tools or anything similar to that find so hard to grab an attack like that. And not to make that process easier, the IoTs block, or the so-called famous IP cameras or DVRs that everyone makes available at the internet. If there is no protection, you are a focus for a main attacker to internet as a whole.
Sometimes you think it's not enough. You see a DVR sending 10, 20 mega, you multiply by this for 500,000 IPs. See the size of the damage, whether in Brazil or outside Brazil. So these are important security issues that we should be aware, and as associations or individually as provider, we must be aware to implement. So again, we need to have your input, your feedback. I will give you some data on the task force we are implementing in relation to this program. Since the allocation process with Facara's team going through the training part that we provide, the course of best routing practices we'll have on Friday. We have some notifications to the operational activities we have in IX. If you remember the presentation 2 years ago,
frutos em relação
where we had success on the control of filters through the user, through the communities. We had 4 activities. One of the last ones was the marking prefixes or taking attitudes in relation to filters. We will have this in IX as well, but this will be directed, or the community has to provide its opinion, so IX can be a tool to improve the scenario, especially in terms of propagation of prefixes in this single knowledge base, which is IGP. Parajo mentioned 1,600 autonomous systems. This is about 30% of what we have in Brazil. But when we look at the amount of prefixes that IX reaches, we have more than 80%. So in terms of scope or reach, it is extremely important for the operation of the network in the country. We should think that it's not only that it's coming from abroad. We have a huge potential of generating damage internally. And why am I calling your attention to training? Because if you look historically, the data on increase of autonomous system, the driver, and we see this in other parts of the world, is the issue of IPv4 exhaustion and how new entrants can participate in this industry during this transition. This year, we will create in Brazil more than 1,000 AS. We are growing more than 20%. These are numbers that we saw some years, this huge number. But if we don't care, or if you don't be careful when we are upgrading the path in a client, because this client that was small in a city closer to you, now you cannot provide any address, and the solution is for him to become an AES. So the level is changing. It had a prefix routed to it, but you took care of everything. Now it's an AS. Even being a stub, you can do something when you change this relationship, because now you are providing traffic. So this type of knowledge must be propagated and must come to the client. And we are trying to embed this since the allocation process. And this also involves the consultants. We know many in Brazil. Some of them are present here today. And this shows as an alternative to keep this growth. But sometimes this is an initial work. We need to keep in mind that we must follow with this, not only with the best practices, but also the issues that we have listed in the PCP NICBR website. And this is the website where we are going to keep this initiative and try to point as the focus for this campaign. Again, it's not a campaign that is starting now. No, it's a long-term campaign. This is not a short-run race. This is a mega marathon. And as the Port 25 project, it lasts for many years. It goes through the measuring process with the Cement Fox and other initiatives. We have some ad hoc initiatives for spoofing, abuses in terms of DNS. We will continue to measure it to have a view on how much this effort is being positive. And when whatever the community sees as beneficial, going to the CERT-BR to collect these statistics and to improve this view and help everybody in this way. It's not a simple initiative. If you don't do anything, what will happen, unfortunately, it will be chaos. As Kleber mentioned, we've been seeing some types of attack, and even those who have the capabilities of large investments are not being successful. And maybe spoofing may seem simple. Oh, why should I do this? It doesn't bring any benefit. But if I don't do, and nobody does, because of the amount of money we can give to Kleber's company or even to other companies, our capacity to generate traffic is much bigger than the capacity of deny. And this race will not take us to a better situation. Another important point is, provided everyone is engaged, there is no strong hand of someone. Whether we roll our sleeves to work together or it will be a chaos. There will be no regulator or a Congress to pass a law or a resolution. We need to raise the awareness that we need to deal with this problem in a collaborative way. Otherwise, it will be a chaos. A microphone here, please. Well, you mentioned the crisis and what Parazzi mentioned. It's a worrying perception. When we talk about the Droid attacks in a great volumetry, there is a concern of having some contention technique for spoofing. So you had high volume attacks associated to amplification. But what we see recently, and we had a peak last week, was a great attack, 160 million packages per second. It was a SIM flood, and it came from a spoofed IP. 20% of this traffic came from Brazil. I'm working at Argo for 10 years. We've never seen such a great volume coming from a spoofing. So it seems that this concern to protect ourselves was lost. You have a very high price when you do not do, and maybe you're paying this. 160 million per second attack is absurd. And imagine if you do this with a 1,500,000 byte packet, you reach 1.9 tera. So it's not the work or the job of large operators. Everybody needs to participate because we need to make it more difficult, to happen. Because basically, as you mentioned, the infrastructure does not increase in the same scale. So the work of everyone in this scenario plays an important role. Most of the network equipment today do this easily. So this was a client that was attacked by a spoofing. So it's the end work. Yeah. No, it seems that for those who are connected in the internet, who controls the internet access, thinks that this is a problem. It's a big problem that they cannot help. But in fact, everybody can. If there is no collaboration of everyone, we won't scale. So this is very sensitive. I was scared about this spoofing attack. I didn't imagine and see something in this volume spoofed. I imagined amplified. And what we saw, Fred, and what I see are small attacks, 10 mega, 8 mega, going from DSL IPs or fiber connections, small attacks. And since we have some tools in the network, we are able to detect. But summing, if you sum all these millions, it becomes a monster. Yeah, the key point of this initiative is that no matter how small you are, and thinking that this will not affect or that you are not going to help, yes, you will help. It will help you and the others. Maybe you are not being impacting receiving an attack, but maybe your network is letting lots of things go out. And in fact, we need to look at our pockets. The most sensible organ of the man is the pocket. So you need to be careful if you're receiving or producing attacks. And this is very important. We know that we have several consultants that provide support to several providers in Brazil, and it's important that not only to put the DGP on air, but to at least apply small security rules like Andre mentioned. This will help not only you, but help the network as a whole. And this is important to communicate to those who work with providers. We know that many times providers are not concerned, the administrator is concerned with another thing, but it's worth, the material is not complicated to read and understand. And all the meetings we see, people respond to, oh, how can I do this in this router or in that router? So I think this is the most important takeaway message, because if we do a little, each of us do something small, we'll have a healthier environment. Just another comment on DNS, which is a serious problem. Usually people opt to use the Google DNS, but these are important things. We should be careful. But this I will leave to another time. Hold on a second. In addition to this internal effort from Nikki to produce documentation, training, and to group the community's point of view, This is not that something that Nick is imposing. No, we need to reach our conclusion on the best way to go. As I mentioned, the network is very, very heterogeneous. We have a small ISP with a great traffic provider. Everybody must be involved. We are doing this in a collaborative way, but it goes beyond, especially for wide broadband providers. This affects in a very expressive way, especially people from Sigitele Brazil. They have an influence in this. It's a very difficult problem, much more difficult to solve than the other problems we were mentioning. Christine mentioned this specifically because, you know, who that delivers CPF to the user knows the equipment stays for 5, 10 years in the user's house. And many problems is that this equipment is not managed remotely, cannot be updated. It's allowed on where and the vendor provided but does not provide any upgrade. So Milton is working with people from the industry, but unfortunately they didn't come to this meeting, but they will get together with us with this in this effort. But it also depends that when we buy, we need to demand it. If I cannot monitor or update remotely, I will not recommend it to my user. So this effort is much bigger than just man's, but whatever is possible to collaborate with institutions that are doing something already to improve the internet in terms of security, we will also do. And I'd like to make it clear. We thank Andrea's presence here because in spite of being the low-ranking fruit in relation to the 4 items, they are really important. Now you have the floor. Good morning, Douglas from Union West. Well, my first question it relates to this approach of checking at the origin point. I don't know if you have, I know you had something in line, a mix of ethical hacking, where you check that certain networks are exposed to certain problems. And with this information, what are the mechanisms that Nick uses to guide and to orient the holders of this resource, check this, or if there is any other measure for the guy, to fix the network, because if you're bad, you will damage everybody. This is the first point. The second point is much more central in relation to IX. We've been discussing this a lot. The aspect of mitigation. Maybe it's a demand that is not the point of this panel, but the possibility of having a hole in IX. We see the problem of origin validation, where anyone could put an 888/24 and kill the internet. And with this, we have heavier and more complicated protocols like our RPKI. They're here, but it's not taking off. And a simpler solution could be proposed with IX, allowing a black hole in IX. So I'd like to know Nick's position concerning this. Well, specifically, as Christine mentioned, Nick's internal policy is not to perform any scan. We scan services. You have a delegate domain, we can scan. but we scan due to the data we receive, as Christine mentioned, to notify, we check if it is really happening, and we notify. But one of the manners line or action is to keep your data updated. So something that is happening, but we do this. What you listed as ethical hacking, we do not do.
Or anything along those lines. It's even a bit hard to define what that is, in fact. As to IX measures, by implementing filters by community, one of the items, which is the fourth one and not implemented yet, is to mark a prefix with any type of database, stubs AS, allocation. That's not defined yet. What to do? The community has to reach a conclusion like, well, this is the best way to follow. Depending on how hard that measure is, that may lead to some operational impact. The black hole thing is different. And many, many times, if you get rid of black hole, that is our last resource. But effectively, black hole will just deny my services. This is somewhat food for thought. And spoofing by itself, there is always a comparison made with door 25 or portal 25. The turning day, the turning point maybe when from now on all carriers, they are allowed to place a filter and just go on. It's not that everyone will be aware of that. Well, the email problems because there was a block, so there is all that mass word of mouth here and there. People say block, let's block it. So my suggestion is to have a spoofing turning day that may be helpful from a organic growth, if you know what I mean. Well, we had several days, maybe even years, I'm sorry. Port 25.
Virada, não foi dias não, foram anos.
Port 25, we had that for years and years, maybe what, 7 years? 7 years promoting that. And we did that in several ways. You just name it. We try to be as creative as possible. Just to give you an idea, I believe that in the past 2 days, things really became hot. There was a carrier that would turn by districts, by neighborhoods, by regions. Otherwise, they would explode the number of people calling. Many, many years before carriers started, many main providers, they turned their ports to secure one. That was a long-run work. So the idea is not to have the anti-spoofing turning day, as that may stop, put a halt in the internet. Maybe they put something wrong, a wrong CL. You have to apply your security policies.
Aplicar a primeira, vamos ver como é o resultado.
If I have nothing, let's just apply the first one. Let's wait for the result and then proceed to the second one. It's part of a process, and that requires a high level of convince. People have to be convinced, fully convinced, so we may reach a common denominator. In case of port 25, we needed some sync between telco and email providers. That was the main obstacle. But once you adopt good practices, you do the hardware of your router when you apply anti-spoofing, whenever you are ready, secure, once you have tested and everybody is smooth. Anything that depends on synchronizing several networks. And the discussion in place was considering number of clients, actions, emails, volume. So from a sync perspective, it's much simpler adopting those practices now than it was implementing Port 25. Well, were we effective enough with the urgency of Port 25? What we are discussing right now in terms of best practices, it shows much more restriction, technically speaking, but it's up to each one of us to do something. There is no deadline. Maybe that would be much closer to the IPv6 adoption than to the Port 25 day. There are some people taking notes, and we'll publish a document this week about all your comments. I am from Cloudflare. Great honor to be here. You have mentioned providers, etc. What would be your position from CDN collaboration for that initiative? How can large CDNs that are responsible to check great part of the traffic may collaborate? And my second question is, last year there was a botnet initiative where large companies like Google and others participated together to take out of air a botnet. Does NICBR has got an initiative over that? Do you intend to collaborate somehow to decrease those attacks, like the large attack, the great attack that took place a while ago, mentioned by Arbor? We work quite close to CDN's providers, maybe because they participate at IX, or maybe because we render some type of close services to them. But CERT-BR and Christine will talk about that coordination that we have in our nucleo in case our immediate action plays any direct effect over something else. Well, from an attack standpoint, I guess that if we reach different metrics, such as what are those attacks, how are the Brazilian IPs behaving, anonymous metrics, they would be very effective. We make references to articles, blogs, but if there was any type of metric that would work as an additional one to bring a different idea. As to botnet, we have CERT contact, but most of the botnets, they want to take the internal control out of air. But IoTs, CPEs, they are so vulnerable. And after a few months, another one comes and affects and attacks everything else again. So this requires food for thought. Takes down, they happen. Sometimes we from CCERT are involved. And then we get the Brazilian IPs that were part of botnet. And then we reach each one of the autonomous system and we say, well, this list at that day was part of this or that botnet. See what you can do to recover it, so and so. How to have a clear network? How can we disinfect networks? If you want to collaborate at all, throughout changes, and once you have new adoptions, ideally we should see some results, and that has to be based on metrics. You even have several blogs explaining how an attack takes place, and measurement is all. I wish we could have some type of data about those that are checking and following up all attacks. Together with carriers, we try to understand the sources of attacks, and then we inform that when we understand that that's not spoofing, right? If it's a spoofing, that's irrelevant. But last year's Olympic Games, we had that very large attack, which was not spoofed, and then we understood what were the different sources. I don't know if I had copied you in that email information. If not, I apologize, and it's high time we started that collaborative practice. Once you observe anything, you have to communicate carriers, CERT BR, and NIC BR. Yeah, I have a similar comment. Honeypot project, I don't know if you have ever heard about that, which focus on IP reputation. We could talk over about that over lunch. Thank you. And talk with the Nick BR. You know that panel that we'll have later on, talk with Nick BR, will be throughout the whole afternoon in the next room. Some other colleagues from IX PTT will be there, so if you want to come and talk to us, it will be a pleasure. As to abuse, on Thursday during the GTS, we'll have a panel addressing how does NIC BR deals with domain name abuse. We have a question from YouTube. Diego Canton asks, in Christina's presentations, he states that his clients get CERT notifications, and he would like to know if it would be possible to make tools available where people could deploy their internal tests. Sometimes I have clients, they could check their internal attacks. How can I do it? Is there anything else that you can tell me to help me, if it's possible to have a list of tools? And the submitted notifications for those alerts with amplifications. The email ends with some test suggestions, most of them command lines done over Linux platform. If has a specific example of notification which hasn't got, just let us know. But at CERT, we have a free software command. Some cases, tests, they have to be done externally. If you want to know if that is an open resource or not, you have to test somewhere else. You have to be somewhere else. But if this guy who asked has any question or suggestion about obstacles and difficulties, just get back to us and we'll try to improve it and see what's not working fine. But at least we try to have that information at the end of all messages. Well, we are. It's almost time to conclude before lunch, and my home take message is participate, please. During the week, give us your opinions. If you do not want to make them loud, just come and talk to some of the NIC BR's representatives. So your final thoughts, final remarks, so we can close this panel. We have to leverage a coordinated and collaborative attempt. Despite anything else that Chris told us, I think we are facing something even more complex than Port 25, as there are several variables, different equipments, different threats, probably within 1 to 2 years, we'll be talking about things that would ever even think about them today. So I think this is a problem that will require our involvement and attention for a long time, and even though we won't be able to solve that for good. That requires continual efforts. Network security is crucial. You cannot just pretend it does not exist. Otherwise, you have just passwords like 123 change, admin, and things like that. We have to close the network really well. External accesses for SSH routers, BCP, and others. So that's a non-stop process. First investment is your individual investment to go after information in order to improve your security. Two last comments regarding DNS. Sometimes they are worried about BGP, ASN, the first IP block, and they do not consider DNS. Providers, they should implement their DNSs at their closed networks and just answer back to their IPs. With your DNS working properly, your cache efficiency, many people using cache, right? Your cache efficiency will improve a lot, much more than if you use Google DNS. Your efficiency will be much better if you have your own DNS to your clients. And last, IPv6. Do not forget IPv6. I see many OSN going up, the first /22. What about block IPv6? If you do not start performing tests with that, you will never get there. And there are several providers spending a lot of money with CGNet or any other net forms. If there is any security incident, and by that I mean with a criminal investigation about any problem that happened in your network, if I haven't got IP information, despite there is a feasible technical excuse, that will be a pain in the neck. Believe me, headache for you. And the only way to address that is to work properly with V4, start with V6. As sooner or later, we'll have that turning point to V6, where in your network you have a native V6. And last, there are many providers, 1 or 2 traffic providers, that they break their blocks in different ways to improve their traffic, but they end up re-injecting the announcement from the backbone to their network. So be careful. Sometimes an AS between a large provider, which is Algar, the guy re-injecting the announcement with Algar prefix, sending to someone else. That's so simple, so pay attention. Be careful. These are some ways to help us to improve network security. But the home take message is, do not let aside, do not take for granted security. Security is a key aspect, a crucial point while managing your business.
I think we're talking about foundation, and if our foundation is shaky, we cannot build a sustainable and good building on top of it. So I think what is discussed here is very important. We also talk a lot about collaboration. I think we need to find and continuously continue to find better ways to reward this collaboration. One of that rewards, I believe, is transparency. I think we need to promote leaders who do good stuff, not so much blame, but sort of create wall of fame and promote the experience as well. Help others with tools and information. That's also very important, because if you're not sure what your position, what your security posture is, there is no motivation to improve. And the last comment is that although Manus is a global effort, really global effort, and that's important, it leverages local communities. And local community can do a lot. I think you can build a sort of safe neighborhood and see the benefits of such collaboration quicker and more visible. I mean, there was discussion that many of the things are not coming from the outside, but originated in Brazil. So I think if you do those simple measures, what we discussed here, in collaborative manner, you will realize the benefits much quicker than if you sort of try to boil the ocean and do this globally.
Cris?
Bom, primeiro só
Let me just, I don't think that's easy stuff, but synchrony sounds easier than port 25. Maybe not. What Paraggio mentioned about IPv6, security cannot be forgotten, and best practices cannot be forgotten either. And people that are taking IPv6, they're forgetting to implement port 25 management. That should be part of your checklist always. What you find in manners are quite simple to be carried out, and those will reduce 80% of your challenges. And how can we then reduce the problems, deal with them easier, and not try to solve them 100%? What to do them to get rid of what is bad, thanks to simple measures. What can I do in my network? What are the simple things that I can keep on doing in my network to let it very clean, health, and secure? That's it, guys. Thank you so much for your participation. I hope that you keep on participating at our discussion list, talking to Nick BR team to allow a secure future internet. Thank you.